Module 5, Graphs and Equations of Lines. This is section 5.6, Slope and Rate of Change. In this video, we'll look at how to find the rate of change, also known as slope, of a line 3 different ways. The slope of a line could be positive, where it looks like the line is going up from left to right. This is when your x values are increasing. It could have a negative slope, where the line is going down from left to right and your x values are decreasing. If there is no tilt in the line and the line is laying flat, it is a zero slope. All horizontal lines have a slope of 0. This happens when your y values stay the same. And if you have 2 or more points along the same line and all the y values are the same, you will have a horizontal line. Later, when we look at the slope formula, you'll have a numerator that is a 0. If you have a line that is going straight up and down, if you have a vertical line, that's considered an undefined slope. There is no numerical value attributed to a vertical line. If you were to use the numerical formula that we'll look at later in the video, you'll wind up with a 0 in your denominator, which is why the slope is undefined. Any fraction that has a 0 in the denominator is undefined. If you're given 2 points, you can find the slope of a line by using the formula of the change in y over the change in x. We usually just say rise over run. You'll label one of the points x1, y1, and the other one x2, y2. For example, if I had the points 4, -3, and 2, 2, I could label x1, y1 to be 4 and -3, and then I'll let the point 2, 2 be x2 and y2. When I substitute that into the formula of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, I will subtract on the top and the bottom. 2 minus a -3 is 5, and 2 minus 4 is a -2, and so my line has a slope of 5 over -2. If I were to make the point 2, 2 x1, y1, and the point 4, -3 x2, y2, I would get the same result, just my signs would be in different locations. So it would have -5 over a +2. It doesn't matter which point is the first point and which is the second point. What matters is that the subscripts match, that x2 has to be with y2 and x1 needs to be with y1. You can also find the slope of a line if you're given the equation of the line. If I'm given the equation of a line being -3x plus 2y equal to 11, if I rewrite my equation in the form y equals, the coefficient that's on the other side of x is going to be the slope. The other number, if there is one, will be important in a later video, but for today we're only interested in what the coefficient of x is. But it has to be y equals. It must be y equals and then everything else on the other side. So if I have the line -3x plus 2y equal to 11, I'm going to need to start out by getting the 3x to the other side. This is a -3x. I'm going to add 3x to both sides. This leaves me with, on the left-hand side, 2y is equal to 3x plus 11. I need it to be a 1y, not 2y. So I'm going to have to divide every number in the equation by the coefficient of y. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and now on the left I have y. 3x divided by 2 is 3 divided by 2. I can put the x out to the side. And 11 divided by 2 will leave as 11 divided by 2. The slope of this line is 3 over 2. It's positive, so my line is going up from left to right. If I'm given the equation of the line being a -y equal to 6x minus 7, we're much closer because the y is alone. However, I need it to be a positive y. So I'm going to have to divide each number in my equation by a -1. So I have a positive y equal to a -6x plus 7. The slope of this line is a -6. This has a negative slope, and the line goes down from left to right. I can also find the slope of a line from a graph. You start with the point that is furthest to the left, And then you are looking for the rise. How much did I go up or down? Over the run to the right. So rise, if it's going up, it's going to be a positive number, and if it's down, it'll be a negative number. We're always going to talk about running to the right, so my denominator will always be positive. From this point, I would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 down, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right. So the slope of this line is negative 4 over 5, which makes sense since this is a negative slope and my line is going down from left to right. Two lines that never intersect are called parallel lines, and parallel lines have the same slope. So two lines that have the same slope will never intersect. These could be vertical lines, they could be horizontal lines, they can be positive slopes, they could be negative slopes. If I want to find the slope of a line that's parallel to the line that is going through 0306, first I would have to find the slope of this line. And I can find that using my slope formula. I don't need to graph the whole line. I can say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The slope of this line that is going through these 2 points is a negative 1/2. Since we know that parallel lines have the same slope, a line parallel to the line that's going through 03 and 60 would also have to have a slope of a negative 1/2. Every line has an infinite number of parallel lines. All you need to do to have a group of parallel lines is for all the lines to have the same slope. Two lines are perpendicular if they intersect at a 90-degree angle. So not just intersect, but do so at a 90-degree angle. In order to find a perpendicular slope, you need to take the slope of the first line and find the negative reciprocal. So if it's a fraction, you will find the reciprocal and then flip the sign. If you were to multiply the two slopes, the product of the slopes would be a negative 1. The only caveat to this is horizontal and vertical lines. Since you can't multiply 0 by an undefined to get a number, since one of them is undefined, it would have to just be memorize that these two are perpendicular if these are my two lines right here. Find the slope of a line perpendicular to the line that goes through negative 1, 3, and 2, negative 8. So first I'll find the slope that goes through the 2 points. I could say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and I get a negative 11 over 3. The symbol for perpendicular is an upside down T. The perpendicular slope will take this slope, change the sign, so it will become a positive 11 over 3, and then find the reciprocal of the fraction. So the perpendicular slope is 3 over 11. We're going to pause now and look at several different examples. On this worksheet, we're going to look at several different ways to find slope. In the first one, we're going to use our slope formula for 2 of them, and then one we're just going to count. For the slope formula, remember it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. It doesn't matter who's x1, y1, or x2, y2. All you need to do is remember that the subscripts need to match. The slope for A would be 7 minus 5 over 1 minus 6. 7 minus 5 is 2, and 1 minus 6 is a negative 5. So the slope for that line is a 2 over a negative 5. To find the slope from a graph, you start at the leftmost point and work your way to the right. This point is at negative 1, 4. I would need to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units, and then over 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right. And so this has a slope of a -5/4. You could also find both of these points if you wanted to and use the slope formula. See if you can find C. The answer for C would be -3 minus 0 and 0 minus a -5, which would be a -3 over a +5. In the second section, we want to find the slope of each line by rewriting the equation. Remember, it needs to say y equals, and then you're specifically looking for the number in front of x. Remember, m and b will be numbers. Y and x will stay, but for slope, we were looking at what number is in front of x. For a, all I would need to do is subtract x from both sides, and I would get y equals a -x plus 12. So my slope is a -1. For letter C, I would need to subtract the 11x from both sides to get -3y is equal to a -11x plus 33. And then I would have to divide by a -3 the entire way through the equation to find that y equals a +11/3 x minus 11, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. My slope is 11/3. Pause the video and see if you can find the slope for B and D. The slope for B would wind up being a -3. We would subtract 3x from both sides for y equals -3x plus 8. So your slope is a -3. For D, all I need to do is subtract 9x. Y equals a -9x minus 12, and so your slope is a -9. Let's look at number 3 and see if we can identify if lines are parallel and perpendicular, or possibly neither. For letter A, I'll need to rewrite both of these in y equals form to see if the slopes match, that the coefficient of x. You can't do it as is because they're not y equals. So let's rewrite the top one right here. I would need to subtract the 3, so I'll have 3x minus 3 is equal to 2y. And then I'll divide everybody in here by a 2, which will give me a positive 3x over 2 minus 3/2 is equal to y. So my slope is a 3/2. If I were to rewrite the bottom one, I would subtract the 2x from both sides, and I have 3y is equal to -2x plus 2. And when I divide by 3, I got y equals a -2 over 3x plus 2/3. 3/2 and -2/3 are negative reciprocals. If I take the reciprocal of 3/2, I get 2/3, and when I flip the sign, I get the negative. These two lines are perpendicular. See if you can rewrite the equations in letter C and see if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Pause the video and then check your answer after you're done. Let's see what happened in letter C. I'm going to need to, subtract the 16 from both sides. So I get 9 is equal to 9x minus 16 is equal to a -3y. When I divide everybody by a -3, I get 9 divided by a -3, which is a -3, and -16 divided by a -3, so positive 16/3. For my bottom equation, when I subtract the 16 from both sides, I get 12x minus 16. And then I'll have to divide everybody by the -4. And I get y equals, 12 divided by -4 is a -3. And -16 divided by a -4 is a +4. And these slopes are the same. So these two lines are parallel. For D and E, we want to find the line that is a slope that's parallel and the slope that's perpendicular. I'm going to do D right down here. Let's find the slope of this line. I'm going to let this be x1 and y1, x2, y2. The slope of this line that goes through these 2 points would be -1 minus a -5 and a -1 minus a -5. So this is going to be 4/4, known as a 1. The parallel slope would be the same, also a 1. Perpendicular means to flip your fraction and then flip the sign. So if I flip the 1, well, I get another 1/1. This is positive, so I'll need to make this negative, and so my perpendicular slope is a -1. Try letter E and see if you can find the slope that goes through these 2 points, and what the parallel and perpendicular slope would be. For letter E, the slope would be a -4 minus 10 over a 5 minus a -2, and I get -14 over 7, or -2. I'll write it as a -2/1. My parallel slope, the symbol for parallel looks like 2 else, would have to be the same exact thing, -2. My perpendicular slope, well, I'd have to flip this fraction upside down so he becomes a 1/2, and then change that sign. It's negative, so now it's positive, and the perpendicular slope would be negative or positive 1/2.